Hi, I'm Susan Clare, GourmetQuilter, and here to show you today a bit of fun, maybe for using some leftovers. I have specifically worked with some 2.5-inch strips and some 5-inch squares, but you can do it with any size. I'll show you how to do that. So as you can see, I do have a leftovers pantry, and in my pantry I have lots of incomplete 2.5-inch strips. So this is a great way of using up some of these. And so what I've done is, as you can see behind me here, is created a single shape, and then I've positioned it onto a 5-inch square, and you can do all sorts of things. I'm going to show you some other layouts as well. So in order to create this shape, so you can do this with any size square. This is the beauty of it, and they can be all different. I've gone for lights for my backgrounds and colours to go on top. You might have a whole lot of blues, you might want to use those, you might have a whole lot of greens, or you might want to use blue and green together, or black and white, or you've got the colours. So if I'm trying to work out how to work out my shape and size and things, I've used a 5-inch square here. It's going to finish at 4.5 inches when it's sewn in. And in order to create the shape, so as I said, any size square, but this is how I've gone about it. So I've just found what the diagonal was, and you can simply do it by folding a square in half of the size that you want to use. You might have lots of squares. And I've just drawn a shape. This is on fusible web here. But I drew a shape that would fit within, allowing for some seam allowance at each end. So it's a little bit smaller, and also it fits within a 2.5-inch strip going that way. So onto my 5-inch squares, and I've got some cut out here. This is one of these shapes cut out, and so I can position that knowing that I'm going to lose a little bit at each end for seam allowance. So you don't want to make it too absolutely exact, just give yourself a little bit of room to move. And so that when you put them onto a square like that, well, we can do it while I'm here. This has got a fusible web which is a little bit sticky. And so I would just position that. So it may be helpful to put a little fold in, a finger pressed fold on your squares for positioning, so that you get them just where you want them. And you can position that on and then iron that in place. And it's as simple as that. And as I said, you could make it on a bigger square with a bigger shape. You could do a smaller square. It depends what you want to use up, really. I'm using 2.5 and 5. So I've got plenty of 5-inch squares that are in just a variety of different lights. That's because that's what I was preferring. You could have a dark background. There's so many different possibilities. So the single shape on here, you could put 4 together to make a kind of flower-like thing. Now, if you're not liking that centre because you feel they're not meeting the way you'd like, you could of course always add a little circle or something like that, but I'm always quite happy with my centres being ever so slightly off and a little bit organic. So I've gone ahead here and I've cut out, so I've got plenty more shapes ready for me to position onto my fabric. I've got some more shapes that I haven't put on yet, but I've got a whole lot here that I have already ironed in place. So there's so much you can do. You could have them all repeating, going the same way, and you end up with a sort of diagonal stripe. Just remember, you're going to be losing that seam allowance, so you're going to end up with these diagonals. Now you could alternate and take one row out so that they're a little bit more spaced, but what you'd end up with is something that's a little bit like this. If you just repeated, they wouldn't all be the same colour necessarily. But this is showing how the shapes would sit just repeated in a diagonal line. You might want to turn them round, you might want to make more like a sort of a zigzaggy type shape that goes across a quilt, and we'll get this sorted any minute now. That way, and maybe that way. Almost like a stem would come up and they could be leaves, or it can just be that zigzag across or up and down a quilt, and that is going to look something like that if you just put the squares together. Of course you can separate things with sashing, you could add a stem and make it a plant stem. There's so many things, and it can all be done in these sort of multicolours, or as I said, you might have a whole lot of a particular colour that you like. It's so much fun to play with these sorts of things. So really just that single shape. Another option would be to turn them around so that they're going around, which is really just a matter of turning things so that you start off with your centerpiece and then you're changing direction out each side there and just following again along. And again, you could leave out a row every so often to have either something else in there or something a little bit plainer, just to take away the possible busyness. And then of course you could simply make basically this sort of block that I've got up on the wall here, you could make into blocks and repeat across, so that you'd end up with that sort of a grid all over a quilt like that. Like I said, so much fun with a single shape, using up just some leftovers. It doesn't even have to be from your strips and things, they could just be leftovers. Because they're fused on, it wouldn't matter if the grain wasn't straight with the shape for your iron-on part and all of those sorts of things, because I fused them. You wouldn't have to even fuse them, you could do a different sort of applique if that's what you prefer. It was more the shape that I was thinking was quite good. And another thought you could do would be simply to do them perhaps around as a border, and you've got something else going on the inside, so that you've got that border that could go around a quilt, but with just a little bit of interest, using some of the fabrics that you've used in blocks inside perhaps, and things like that. What else can I show you? There's another sheet here. This one here, I have done pretty much what I've got up behind me, but I've left some empty. So you could put a pieced block in there, or you could put a different sort of applique, or you could just leave it more open. So many things. It is such an exciting little prospect to have one shape that can do all these different things if they just popped on a little square and moved around. And so then there's another thought that you might do. Some of us have quite a few half square triangles, and again I've stuck to the 5-inch finished shape. Well, it'll be finishing at 4.5 inches, but this measures 5 inches at the moment. And I've done just 2 strong colours, but it doesn't have to be. But so that you can have your shape sitting, and I've got one here, right over the dividing line, so that you get a completely different look by putting it straddling 2 colours, simply by making some half square triangles. And so when you put 4 of those together, you could end up with something like that. Now, it doesn't have to be that really dark one, it could be much softer colours if that's what you like to work with. And something like this here, you could set something like that inside if that's what you like the idea of, with a different colour in the middle part there. Or you could do something that was a little bit more like this one here that I showed you, that was just colours all over the place forming a grid. But some of them could have something like this, so that you've got some of these colours forming some little block areas like that, which again gives yet another different look. It is so exciting. So I just thought that was an idea for you to have a little think about, some sort of a shape that you can create to suit the size that you want to use up or to work with. It doesn't have to be use it up. You could plan a whole quilt just with that single shape, fitting diagonally on a square, because the diagonal gives you that range of movement so that they can go this way, that way, all sorts of ways. You could bring in other colours that you want to make a stripe. If you put a whole lot of the half square triangles in a row, you could have them looking quite different again with a different colour between. So many things. This was really just to encourage you to have a little play, have a think about some bits and pieces that you might have and you might like to perhaps use up, or to create something amazingly interesting just with a single shape put onto a square behind. So that was the idea for today. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'll be back again another time with some more ideas. Thank you.